Hi, everyone. It is Jamie Jill right here at Madlet Musings, and I've got my podcast voice on this morning or afternoon or whatever day. Anyway, I have Jocelyn Green with us today. Jocelyn.
Yay! Happy to be here.
Yes. So this podcast is airing in May, but we are recording it in the middle of January, hence the sweatshirts and turtlenecks.
Yes.
So the nice thing is when you think about a podcast airing a little bit later after you've recorded, you already start smelling spring in the air because it's like, ooh, it'll be in May. This will be nice.
Yes. Yes. And I need that hope right now. It's been a brutal January here in Iowa, and I'm sure it has been in
Yes.
Wisconsin, most places.
Yeah, I actually opened a window today because it felt warm outside, and then I realized it was only 20 degrees.
Oh, well, I mean, compared to the
Right.
sub-zeros that we've been having.
Exactly. Exactly. But anyway, we're not here to talk about the weather in January or in May. We're actually here to talk about your release that's coming up in June here. Um, that is book 2 in the On Central Park trilogy, and it's
Yep.
called the Hudson Collection.
It is called that.
I
Yeah.
just love that. It's cool. The cover's gorgeous.
I'm glad you like it.
I do. I like the spot of red on her dress. I'm
I
looking
do
at it.
like that.
Hmm.
And I like the embellishment on the outside, the
Yes.
border. It's like
Yes.
kind of like bird cage
Hmm.
stuff.
Hmm.
And there are little tiny birds on either side, which is really important because the main character is an ornithologist.
Aha. I was going to ask if there was a significance to that.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's cool. Okay, so tell us about this book because, I think of characters and I'm like, oh, I need to give them a career. They'll be a barista. So all my characters are baristas. And you come up with these interesting careers that wouldn't even cross my mind, like an ornithologist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? Where? How'd that come about? Talk to me.
Yeah. Well, how did it come about? We were planning the series, my editor and I, and
Okay.
we wanted the protagonists for all three books to be working at museums in New York City, in Manhattan. And they just ended up all being on Central Park, hence the name of the series, On Central Park. So, the Metropolitan Affair, the protagonist, Lauren Westlake, is a curator, assistant curator of Egyptian art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Hmm.
And now this one, Elsa Reisner, is Lauren's roommate and cousin, and she's an ornithologist at the American Museum of Natural History.
Okay.
And the third book will be about Ivy Malone, who's the third roommate, and she will be working at the New York Historical Society.
Ooh.
So in book 2, the Hudson Collection, Elsa is a polio survivor.
Okay.
And so this kind of still has some residual effects on her lungs and one of her legs that she still wears a brace on.
Hmm.
Um, the inciting incident for the story is that she is tasked with going to this country Gothic estate of a woman who just died. I know, Jamie, your
I'm like, my
eyebrows are
eyebrows are
lifting.
perking.
She's listening because this old woman died and bequeathed this entire collection of stuffed birds to the museum. And
Okay.
it's Elsa's job to go out and look at the collection and try to find the field notes for it to see if they want to bring it into the museum or if it's not worth it.
Okay.
So probably more than half the book is set outside of New York City at
Okay.
this Gothic estate.
That's
And
what you
she
need to read. Oh,
yeah, it was really I really enjoyed the change of scenery, and it's how old decrepit houses are. They're really fun to ride in.
they really are. Thank you.
Yes, because they hold all kinds of stories.
Yeah.
And what she finds there is that the gardener and her daughter have been allowed in this woman's will to remain in their cottage um, as long as they want to. And the daughter, who is on the autism spectrum, but we don't use those words in the book because it's 1926.
Right.
But the daughter was willed a medieval aviary, not like
Okay.
a big thing with birds in it, but like an illuminated manuscript.
Oh.
So the woman who willed this to the daughter she didn't have children of her own, but she had a nephew, and her relatives are really upset that this object was willed to this 12-year-old girl.
Okay.
And so they don't know where the aviary is. So there's like, it's kind of like a treasure hunt for this aviary before time runs out. And um, we meet a couple of veterans of the Great War, scars
Mhm.
inside and out, and their dog, who was helpful over in Europe, going through the trenches and bringing water to the
Oh,
soldiers. And his name is Barney.
oh,
So it's really an interesting but small group of characters at the estate between Elsa and the architectural salvage dealer and his assistant, and then the gardener and her daughter, who's
okay.
um, you know, atypical
Mhm.
neurologically, and how this was also in the 1920s the peak of the eugenics movement, which
Yes.
was like all about creating the perfect human ideal. And
Hmm.
so that affects how people view this daughter, and it affects how Elsa views herself as a polio survivor and just feeling like she's very imperfect. But
Right.
um, yeah, so it's really interesting to write a character who has a chronic, um, I don't know if we would call it illness, but kind of, with
Yeah.
the effects of polio, and
Mhm.
how even though she prays for healing, she's not going to be completely healed.
Right.
And what do you do with that, like spiritually? How do you deal with that? And hopefully it will just prompt readers to think about that in their own lives, because even if we don't have something right now that we've been praying for and not getting, it's going to happen,
Yeah.
like for
It is.
all of us.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because sometimes God just simply says no for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And then I usually rant and rail at him, and I'm like, okay, fine. You can tell me no, but you need to tell me why you said no. And he
Hmm.
doesn't often do that either. So,
No, he doesn't always do what we tell him to.
oh, I'm like, what's with that? But it is funny because like 10 years later, sometimes you look back and go, oh, I see why you said no now.
Right.
Or you see the purpose and why he's allowed things. Now, I'm really excited that you have a main character who does have some physical malady that she's going to struggle through that
Hmm.
is chronic, because I don't think you see that a lot in
Hmm.
fiction with heroines. Like they get injured or they need to get rescued, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But chronic illness is something readers really will relate to
Hmm.
on multiple levels. Um, and polio, remind me, polio, like the polio vaccine, when was that created? Do you know?
Not until decades later.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So polio was really something that was pretty rampant for quite
There
a while.
were multiple waves of
Yeah.
epidemic. I mean, most people, when you think of the polio epidemic, you think of the 1950s. So
Uh,
obviously, this happened much earlier. The book is set in 1926, and she got it when she was a child. Um, but
okay.
for a small percentage of people who had polio, 15 to 20 years after they first contract it, they notice symptoms of it all over again, or
Mm,
the symptoms that they used to have, like, got better and were becoming mild, get
mhm.
worse. And so that's what happens to my character.
That's really interesting. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. And that's real. Oh, wow. That would be really defeating too, because you'd feel like, am I getting this all over again?
Yes.
Is this going to be permanent now?
And it was so little understood that her doctor is saying, is this a bid for attention? And so
Uh,
then you've got mind games and the mental battles, and yeah, there's a lot to work with there.
Yeah. Well, and that's something with chronic illness as a whole. I think anybody who struggles with it gets that to a degree, even today, where it's like,
Yeah.
is it really as bad as you think it is? Or suck it up? Because so much of the, even the autoimmune
Right.
chronic illnesses are like the invisible ones. Like it's not like you're walking around with a cast on your arm because you broke your arm.
Right. Yes. Exactly. With the invisible ones, people start to wonder, like,
Yeah.
do you really feel that bad? Or are you just trying to get out of things?
Right. Right. Yep. Totally relate to that. I have chronic fatigue that goes along with some other stuff. And every Sunday, I'm like, I can barely keep my head up. And they're like, really? Haven't you been sleeping? I'm like, yeah, like 8 to 9 hours a night. And I still feel like I haven't slept all week. So There are things that just happen. So I think that's really cool, all that to say that Elsa has that in her storyline. Because I think a lot of readers are going to relate to that aspect. However, I have to move on because I'm really curious about how Elsa Reisner becomes an ornithologist, because this was after the women won the vote, but still when women were still pretty much homemakers and things like that. So take me, like, you
Yes.
go from that stereotype to a really brainy ornithologist type of a role.
Well, okay. Her job title officially at the museum is just research assistant.
Oh,
So it's not like she didn't have a PhD yet. She went to Vassar College, which was an all women's
right.
college to study biology. And so that allowed her to get this job doing um, kind of menial things, dissecting birds, skinning and stuffing birds, managing inventory. And so part of the story is that she used to have this passion for living birds. You know,
Okay.
when she was a bedridden child, she could look out the window at the birds. She's wondering, am I ever going to walk again? And then
Yeah.
she's looking at birds and thinking, look at them fly. I wish I could fly. And it was just an interesting thing for her. And so, one of the things, the revelations that she has during the book is that her dream job is actually not as fulfilling as she thought it would be because she's into living birds, not just skinning dead birds,
Yeah.
you know? So she's got to figure out like where does my passion come in and how can I reignite it? And I really like how it ends. It's not the it's not the conventional way to tie a story up with a neat bow.
Okay.
And it's something that actually um, ministered to me after I was reading through it during one of the editing phases. I'm sure you had this too, but
Yeah.
you read a line and you're like, oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
wrote that and I had no idea that that would apply to my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, jeepers. That's cool though. And I like the concept of the living versus the dead. I mean, that's kind of a neat parallel too with our lives. And sometimes we feel like we're just the stuffed birds on a shelf. We really want to just fly. I just want to fly. That's kind of neat. But um skinning and stuffing birds, though, really, that was considered menial.
Well, maybe menial is the wrong word, but you didn't have to have a PhD to do it. You did have to be a perfectionist and,
Yeah.
and have small hands would help. And so she
Hmm.
did. She was really good at it. But that's another really interesting
Yeah.
point of discussion. Like, just because you're really good at something doesn't mean that it's going to bring you joy. I mean, I'm really good at cleaning toilets, for example.
It
I'm good
doesn't
at
bring
it.
you joy,
I don't love it.
Jocelyn.
No, and I don't want to and we need people to do that. So I don't know. I could kind of talk myself in circles about that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying though, and it is kind of funny because I think a lot of times we feel, when we're younger, oh, this is what we're going to be when we quote grow up, unquote. And then you find out, even if you do pursue your passion, like you and I were talking before, we even came on to start recording, writing is sometimes something you do because you have to. Like we have a deadline or we've made commitments. And sometimes you kind of long for those days when you could just write because it was fun. And
Yeah.
not that it's not fun, but it's got a different element of association to it sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go where everybody wants to go. Treasure hunt, really? Is this like
Yeah.
a little bit Indiana Jones-ish?
Well, my editor, Dave, tells
Hmm.
me that people don't read me to get mystery and suspense. They, they read you for that. Um, they read me for character development or something. And so there is treasure hunt and there are, kind of fun things that they discover in this old house. But it's not as suspenseful as a suspense genre book. This is still
Gotcha.
straight historical fiction.
Okay. All right. So there's intrigue without high octane action and
Right.
people aren't chasing them across the tops of trains to kill them.
Not across the tops of trains. There's kind of a suspenseful scene on Coney Island one
Ooh,
night. Yeah, that
ooh,
was kind of fun to write Coney Island and work in Nathan's famous Frankfurters. It's
what?
this famous hot dog place that's still there on Coney Island, but now it has other branches. And I don't know if you've ever seen on TV these 4th of July hot dog eating contests.
I've heard of them.
Okay,
Yeah.
you've heard of them.
Yeah.
They originated with Nathan's Famous. It was like a marketing gimmick to get people to come. And
My
it started
goodness.
off with just, 10 hot dogs. And now, like, the most recent winner ate dozens, maybe 100. I don't know. I probably
Oh,
shouldn't even throw anything out, but it's just like an
too
ungodly
many.
number of hot dogs to eat all at once. So, yeah, so we
Yeah.
got to go to Coney Island. And of course, there's a lot of park scenes, and we're doing bird watching, but she's also going to the Ritz for dinner and the
Oh,
plaza. So
yeah. There is, at least along, as far as the terms of the cover, a little bit of that Great Gatsby feel, like vibe going. Probably just because it's the era of the 20s.
well, also because she's got this little handbag and a hat, even though she's supposedly there for work, she's still wearing like evening wear. But
Minor details, Jocelyn, minor details. And those, I have met people who are not like me who show up and work in a hoodie and pajama pants, but they actually dress up and look really nice and chic.
yeah,
So she could be more accurate to like, average working career women.
yeah, she could be. She could be.
Oh, that's fun. So, did you go to New York then to research all this?
I did.
Okay.
It was one whirlwind trip, and I tried to do research for all 3 books in the series,
Mm,
which is really hard to do.
yeah.
But the best thing I found to do when I do one of these trips is to become friends with a reference librarian on the spot. Because
Mm-hmm.
then after I came home, I was able to get on a conference call with him and explain what I still needed to find. And he
Mm-hmm.
helped me find it. So he's
Yeah.
still like, in my email, and I can contact him whenever I want to about different details of New York City in the 1920s.
Okay. And I know that you're one of those people who really uses those types of resources too. Like you actually connect with them many times.
I do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear that. I've I've made those types of contacts, but for some reason it's weird what like trips up a person when they're researching. And
Mm.
I have this thing where if I can't talk to the person via email and I have to call, I will literally replot my book. Like,
Oh,
oh, I have to use a phone and
that's
I
would you
cannot, I can't do it.
would
I'm
you
terrible.
rather do like a video call than a phone call?
Oh, totally.
Hmm.
I'd be fine with a video. I'd be fine with email. But to pick up a phone and actually talk to a resource connection at a museum is utterly terrifying. And like I did that recently for my book, The Lost Boys at Barlow Theater. And that was the local historian who I know. And I've actually sat on local community boards with him. And I still cannot call. I'm like, it's actually nerve-wracking. Like I get
Wow.
anxious. So I'll be
Oh,
like, email him and I'll be like, hey, Paul, can we do a Zoom call? Can I just
yeah.
call? I'd rather Zoom. He's like, okay, weirdo. But
Well, in a Zoom, you get nonverbal, hand
yeah,
gestures that might help with the
right,
communication too.
right.
So,
Well, and I always get awkward on phone calls, and then there's this long dead air, and then it just gets
oh, well, that's true because if you're taking notes after they've just said something,
right.
and they can't see that you're like, nodding and you're
Yeah,
tracking and you're taking notes, they just think you've gone away.
yeah. And yet then there's people like you who get these resources and these connections. And you're just so good at your research. Okay, I'm gonna close up this with a memory, and I don't know if you remember this, but I think it was the first time we ever met. Somehow we were rooming together, and I don't remember where it was.
I do. It was the Heartland something
That's
conference
right.
in Minneapolis.
Minneapolis. That's right. So my first memory for all the podcast listeners of Jocelyn Green was one of those memories where I'm like, wow, Jamie, you are so shallow because I had a fiction novel in my bag to read before bed, and I don't know what it was, but it was probably something like a murder mystery from the library or something. It wouldn't have been a classic. It would have been just some rando that I pulled off the shelf, right? And I look over, and Jocelyn's perched lovely on the top of her bed with this massive historical tome in her lap. Like it was this thick research book. And I think it was about, I don't know, I want to say it was about the American West or something. And I just remember like looking at you and I'm like, oh, are you doing research? And I'm trying to make a polite conversation. And you're like, well, technically I'm doing research, but this book is just so good. I'm reading it from cover to cover. And I'm like, what? She's
Oh my gosh. That is so funny. So did that make you feel like not reading the book that you brought with you?
Oh, I don't remember. I probably
Oh,
went
okay.
even more shallow and started watching something on my phone because that's where my brain goes. But I'm just sitting there thinking, like, I get research books, right? And I like skim through and I find what I need. And then there's Jocelyn Green who reads them from cover to
Oh
cover. I was
man,
so
that was
impressed with you. I
years
was
ago.
admired you.
Well, I don't really have the luxury of doing that so much anymore. I have to be a lot more mercenary about just going in and getting what I need and getting out, you know? I just don't have
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Well, you heard it all here, folks, for the first time. Jocelyn Green is a closet mercenary.
No, I thought you were gonna talk about, didn't I need desperately to borrow a safety pin from you?
Yes, you
Because
did.
my blouse was like
Hmm.
gapping and I
Hmm.
was very self-conscious about it.
Did I have one?
Yes.
That's also a shock. That's also a
Well,
shock that I actually had one.
well, it's a momentous occasion.
I guess. I don't know. I've just always remembered you as the author that actually reads her research books. Like, and you're probably sitting there going, that is so inaccurate or inaccurate. But I'm like sitting here going, man, if I could just be like Jocelyn Green and read this whole research notebook.
Oh my gosh, that is hysterical. You are so funny.
Well, it's kind of funny, and I don't know if viewers realize this, but I get asked the question, I don't know if you get asked it. Do you compare yourself to other writers? And my answer is always no, because writing is like art, right? Each book is different. Like I'm not going to compare Van Gogh to a contemporary artist of today. Like that just doesn't even make sense. So no, I don't compare my books to other authors.
Mhm.
However, writing technique and research technique, I'm always like, oh, I just Googled it. Oh, sorry, I just Googled it. And then there's other authors who's like, I contacted the head of the CIA and we had a clandestine meeting in an underground tunnel. And I'm going, I just Googled it.
Oh my gosh, that's too much.
Yes. All right. So anyway, that was a
Mhm.
major rabbit trail,
I
but
enjoyed it.
it was fun. It was fun. So the Hudson Collection comes out in June of
Mhm.
2024. It is the second in a trilogy. Do we need to read The Metropolitan Affair book one prior, or do they stand
You don't
alone?
have to. Like if you read
Okay.
the back of the Metropolitan Affair and you're like, I will never be interested in this ever, then go ahead and jump in with book two. But if, this is kind of the thing with series, if you think that you might, then you might as well read
Yeah.
them in order
Yeah.
because
Okay.
you'll know what happens between Lauren and the other characters.
Okay.
If you read book two, you will know the ending of book one.
Absolutely. Okay. That makes sense. So ideally, everybody go out and if you haven't read The Metropolitan Affair, order that. And
Yeah.
then while you're ordering that, pre-order the Hudson Collection because you can still get it at Baker Bookhouse for 40% off and free shipping
Shipping.
right up until its release date. So
Yes. And then the Metropolitan Affair is always 30% off and free
that's right.
shipping. Like
Good
all of
point.
our Bethany House and Revell books are always 30% off and free shipping at Baker Bookhouse.
Yeah, you really can't get it any cheaper anywhere else. And I know I
Mhm.
say that on every podcast that has a Baker author, but it's really true.
Yeah, it is true.
You can't. All right. Well, Jocelyn, thank you for putting up with me and Madlet Musings.
It was so fun to put up with you. I'm
Maybe we
kidding.
can put up with each other again someday, and I'll
I,
bring my little dime novel, and you can bring your your research book and we'll
My
trade.
research tomes. I would love that. I would love that.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everybody.
Bye.